Let's Talk Native is produced at the LTN Studios on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. We break all the rules for Native media by peeling back the layers of assimilation and indoctrination. We may step on a few toes through our examination of culture, art, politics, history, and identity. But the real goal here is to bring our people together by breaking down what separates us. So, welcome to Let's Talk Native with John Kane.
Sego, and welcome to Let's Talk Native. I'm John Kane. I'm your host. And before I get started on today's program, I want to do something I don't normally do. I want to encourage people to go back to my last couple of shows. Our podcast for 520, number 520 and 523, they're a two-part series, I guess you would say, of interviews with the folks involved in this documentary about the youth suicides in Pine Ridge. And of course, if we talk about youth suicides in Pine Ridge, we're really talking about youth suicides everywhere. The name of the documentary is The Bears on Pine Ridge. It features prominently two of the folks that we interviewed, Tiny DeCory and Eileen Janis. The first podcast is an interview with the director, and the second one is an interview with Tiny and Eileen. So I want to encourage you, if you haven't caught those podcasts, to go back and watch them, or listen to them, I should say. We haven't done video for a while. We do post up the audio on YouTube, but usually a pretty static shot. So we are doing a video this week. I want to assure you that I have not had some disfiguring accident that doesn't allow me to be on camera. We just, in doing some of these phone interviews, it doesn't make sense to have me on camera while we're doing a phone interview. And look, we are trying to concentrate this show as more of a podcast. We know that is the trend, and that's where we're going. So I do encourage you to share the podcasts. I know we post the video up on Facebook, and we post the video up on YouTube. But really, it's the audio content. It's what we're talking about here that we believe is important. It's the information that we're providing you. And it's not even so much that we're giving you all of the information. We're trying to interest you to gather more information yourself. That's what the whole purpose of the show is to encourage critical thinking, encourage your own investigation, encourage your own curiosity. Because we know that many of the things that we're talking about on this program, you may never have heard of before, whether you're native or non-native. Look, we as native people, we can become very insular, because we have been so marginalized, and our territories are sometimes remote, or certainly not. We experience a certain level of isolation, even when we have a large population around us. So we do remain somewhat insular. So we don't always know what's going on everywhere. I will say that there is a large portion of the native population that does pay attention to what's happening in other native territories, and we become very, very active. We maintain relationships, and we respond to calls to action. And that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit today. My co-host on my radio show in New York and Washington is Regan DeLoggins, and Regan is an activist, and Regan engages in these activities, in these movements, and Regan responds by going to them. And Regan has really looked into the Line 3 issue, and Regan is involved in it. Regan went to Washington, D.C. to protest, and Regan got arrested. So I wanted to take this show to talk about Line 3, not only as to support what Regan is doing and so many others. Regan is also younger than I am. And a lot of the activists are coming from the younger people. And it's something that I've talked a lot about on this show, that we need to encourage young people. We need to empower them with our encouragement. Now, look, we're not going to dictate what they do and what they don't do, but we need to encourage them to find solutions that we didn't find, and to push solutions that perhaps we didn't push hard enough. look, I'm still very involved in many issues, and I try to stay involved. But I do defer to the younger people, and it's men, it's women, it's LGBTQ spirit. I mean, it's all of our people, in this upcoming generation or generations. So I do want to encourage it, and I want to talk about one of the issues that's pressing right now, and that issue is the fight to stop Line 3. Line 3, if you're not familiar with it, it is a pipeline that is a part of this system of tar sands oil pipeline, taking the dirtiest oil on the planet out of Alberta and bringing it to market. Now, this is Canadian. I don't even want to call it crude, because it's not really crude. It is literally this goo that comes from the earth that is separated from sands. They actually call it bitumen. It is what the Keystone XL pipeline was all about, and this is essentially a part of that. Although the primary thing with the Keystone XL pipeline was about bringing this bitumen, this tar sands oil, to the Gulf of Mexico. What Line 3 is trying to do is bring it to Lake Superior. And of course, so where does it go? It cuts right through the heart of much of the territory that's considered treaty territory. And by that, it is Anishinaabe territory. It either passes by or near or in the water system of several native territories. And of course, and I'm talking about in Minnesota. And what Minnesota and the native peoples there and the native territories there are, one of the main natural resources that they're known for is wild rice. This Line 3 pipeline would cut right through the heart of all of this wetlands that is responsible for producing wild rice. And of course, the cultures of the Anishinaabe in this area are very much tied to that wild rice cultivation and harvest and that kind of thing. So this is a dangerous, very dangerous pipeline. And part of what this pipeline is about is replacing an existing pipeline so it can pump even more of this tar sands oil. By some estimates, the volume of oil that will go through this new pipeline, this new larger pipeline, will produce a larger carbon footprint than the entire state of Minnesota by itself. That's how much volume of oil this is we're talking about. And it's a very, very dirty oil. It's not, look, there's no clean oil, just like there's no clean coal. But this is among the worst. And so the effort is now kind of taking what the whole No DAPL, the fighting the Dakota Access Pipeline, and we're upping the ante, and so we are taking that energy and we're putting it towards this pipeline. So one of the reasons that Regan was in Washington was to call on the Biden administration to stop Line 3, and that is the call that is coming from so many people across many native territories. And look, we're united in this. There's strong solidarity amongst native people to stop this. So if you're unfamiliar with Line 3, I encourage you to look it up. And again, part of what we do with this show is try to create interest in topics that many people may not be familiar with. And if you're not familiar with Line 3, get familiar with it, because it is the next big thing in terms of native people standing up to resist these extractive industries, these fossil fuel industries that stand to pollute our territories. And make no mistake about it, pipelines leak. They all leak. And the standard for pipelines is how much they leak. Now, part of what Line 3 is intended to do is replace the existing Line 3, which is a smaller pipeline, an older pipeline, a leaky pipeline, which part of this battle to stop this development of this new Line 3 is also the fight to remove the old one. There has to be a shift away from fossil fuels. We are not only promoting climate change, with its constant use and the emphasis of these fossil fuel related economies, but we're also destroying homelands of native people. And we have already been so marginalized. I mean, much of the lands that we are on, what is considered the reservations, are just a postage stamp size piece of what was originally our homelands that supported our entire existence. So we didn't just survive off the land; we thrived off the land. But as we've been pushed onto smaller and smaller parcels of land, that's become more difficult. And as that land has been contaminated by any number of national interests of the United States or Canada, it has made it that much more difficult. The game has moved. Migratory patterns of native of animals has changed, and of course, the very food staples that we depend on, have been altered significantly, especially those that grow naturally, like wild rice. So this is really, really important, and it's not just important to the people, the native people of Minnesota. It really it should be important to all of us. Now, keep in mind, as I said, this is about Canada selling its bitumen, its tar sands oil. This isn't about domestic supply for the United States. This isn't a job creator. The company that's trying to put this pipeline in is Enbridge. That's what they do. They're a pipeline company. They're a fossil fuel pipeline company, and they're based in Canada. So this is not a U.S. company. It is not a job creator. It's one of those classic extractive industry infrastructure builds that produces the man camps that we've talked so much about as it relates to missing and murdered Indigenous women. It's this idea of taking men, paying them an oil salary to put these pipelines away from their home. So we oftentimes see the behavior of these men who leave their wives and their children behind and then go off into quote unquote Indian country. We end up bearing the brunt of their temporary residence in our territories as they're building these pipelines that are a danger to our very existence. It is so important that people have a bigger and broader understanding on just what is at stake with these pipelines. Look, there's a lot of great conversation, and lip service coming out of this current administration about green energy, about cutting back on fossil fuels, consumption, and all that other stuff. But where the rubber meets the road is when Native people say, "Look, we don't want your pipeline through our territory." If we can't get that basic support from the United States, from the federal government, as we're trying to stop something that could be devastating to our territories, devastating to our people, devastating to the lands, then you really have to go back and question, how much of this language coming out of this administration is just rhetoric, it's just lip service. So the tone seems to be there. There is the conversation. You look, we know that Biden put a Native person in as the Interior Secretary. We don't know what that means yet. We do know that Deb Haaland works for them now. And the question becomes, how much of our interest is she going to take to that job? Because her first and foremost obligation and responsibility is to protect the national interest of the United States. And we know that, before Trump became president, one of the things that Hillary Clinton ran on was her support for building out federal infrastructure projects. That was her euphemism for pipelines that go through our territories. So we know that the right and the left, the Democrats and the Republicans, have endorsed this kind of thing. And as we hear this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure package being talked about by Joe Biden, it has a lot of great language to it in terms of wind power and electric cars and so many other things. But I don't know how much language has come into the conversation about removing some of these old leaking pipelines, or even dealing with so much of the other latent stranded costs associated with the contamination on native territories. We still have open pit uranium mines on our territories. We have cancer clusters that are caused by it. We have, we have contaminated rivers. We have any number of mines that were never properly remediated after they were abandoned. So we have a lot of things, and I don't want those dollars to be considered dollars going to Native people. We've already discussed on one of the previous shows about how this $31 billion worth of the stimulus dollars going into Native territories, how some people have responded and reacted, actually quite angrily towards it. Like somehow we got something we didn't deserve or something. But when I'm talking about some of this infrastructure stuff, this is about cleaning up your mess. This isn't about giving us a gift. We have territory after territory after territory that'll bring suit against a company. And then they get forced into settling for pennies on the dollar. I think about the Ramapo down in the New York, New Jersey border area, who had this massive lawsuit against Ford Motor Company for the contamination that they committed on Ramapo territory, on Lenape territory. And at the risk of Ford filing bankruptcy, because that was the era that this was going on when the automotive industry was struggling. At the risk of that, they had to settle for pennies on the dollar, and not even really necessarily get all the remediation included in this. We've seen oil companies all over the place. We've seen oil companies that have avoided cleanups of wetlands in New Jersey and so many other places that aren't native territory or still remaining native territory. But the fight that we're trying to fight, whether it's the Dakota Access Pipeline or the Keystone XL Pipeline or Line 3, which is a part of those tar sands oil pipelines, this is something that is important. And it's important that people understand why we fight these issues. There are plenty of people who just think that Native people are trying to get even, or that we're just fighting against any development. Well, development is a problem, and there's a cost. There's always a cost to what the United States considers development, and U.S. companies consider development, or Canadian companies for that matter. And usually, those who bear the brunt of that cost are Native people. We've borne the brunt of it when Canada was expanding its hydroelectric infrastructure, its dams, and it's flooding out massive amounts of native land. Forever changing the migratory patterns of elk and caribou and moose. We have carried that. What it's done to the fishing industry, the trapping industry, all of that stuff. We know what we've experienced, as the Inuit people have experienced because of development in, up north, farther north. And of course, all of this stuff affects climate change. And who are the people who are most vulnerable to climate change? The poorer people and indigenous people. The first climate change refugees were Native people in the Gulf of Mexico, who not only saw the waters rise and flood out much of the lands, but because it's salt water, it changed all the vegetation. It essentially wiped out their existence. And I think they had to spend HUD dollars to relocate a bunch of the Native people on the Gulf Coast. So the first climate change refugees, of course, were Native people. So there's a reason that we step up. There's a reason that we try to champion these issues and try to fight these issues at a level that perhaps many other people can be, complacent over. We know that we can't be complacent. We know that we have to step up. We know that our very lives, not just our livelihoods, but our lives are dependent on protecting the land that we live on. I mean, not only because there are many Native cultures that still sustain themselves because of the natural resources of a given territory, but it's where we live. Look, we are already plagued with the highest suicide rates, as mentioned earlier with the documentary that, again, I will remind people to check out if they get a chance, the Bears on Pine Ridge. We have the highest suicide rates. We have the highest missing and murdered Indigenous women rates, the violence against women. We have the highest substance abuse rates. We have the highest unemployment rates. We have the highest poverty rates. That we have the lowest life expectancy. All of that stuff is because of policy that is pushed by governments, state governments, provincial governments, Canadian government, U.S. government, and the industry that owns them. Because let's be clear, the industry can spend billions of dollars lobbying. So when I've heard people say, well, you guys just need to hire a good lobbyist. No, we don't. And no, we can't. Because our dollars that go into that corrupt system, that pay-to-play system, will never compete with the financial interests of the oil industry. So what are we left with? Well, what we're left with is nonviolent direct action. We have to fight like hell. And look, and I want to be clear when I say nonviolent. I'm not saying we don't destroy some shit here. I'm saying that we don't hurt people. But if equipment has to be damaged, if we have to make it too expensive for the companies, look, we know that they have a lot of money to throw around and they have a lot of political pull. But if we can delay their completion of these things, if we can interfere with the completion, so yes, we're gonna rally, we're gonna protest, we're gonna go to Washington, we're gonna go to these places. But we also, as a people, and I've said this before on the program, we have to recognize that there are things that every one of us can do on our own territories to support a fight on another territory. So, look, I go back to the Gunazadage, what some people know as the Oka crisis. There were Native people who blocked rail lines. They took down power lines. They blocked highways. We saw this year in Tandanega and other places supporting the folks in Wet'suwet'en territory by blocking rail. In Ganawage, in Tandanega, I mean, all these places that Native people, Mohawks in particular, but others too, have stepped up. This is what we need to do. We don't need to put 10,000 people in one place. You know, the one of the things that happened with Standing Rock was that everybody thought they had to go there. So at one point, there was as many as 10,000 people that showed up at Standing Rock. Well, that represents its own environmental issues. Because not every place can immediately be equipped to handle that volume of people. And look, I know people went there for different reasons. Some people went there because they felt they had to go. And I appreciate that. And some people went there for shallower reasons. But regardless, if you are willing to commit yourself to doing something like that, like traveling to go to territory, then you should be committed to doing some things in your own area. Look, many of these companies are connected. You know, if you look at the oil industry, if you follow their organizational chart, you're going to find out that every one of us has some interest of these oil companies in our backyard. And even if we don't have that, we have the banks that finance them. So I think we all need to do more. We all need to step up, and we all need to to hit them everywhere, and not just hit them where we think it hurts. I mean, there's always something, even if it seems small, that we can do. If enough people are doing small actions, it makes a big difference. So, we need to to some extent, follow the lead of some of the people who are on the front lines of these battles. But again, I always talk about empowerment. I think we need to empower our young people. We need to, let them do some of what their skill sets, involve, whether it's the internet, whether it's social media. If they can generate the kinds of calls to action that we perhaps didn't do well enough, I'm not saying what those actions have to be, but I'm saying that we need to step up in a big way. This is now getting at a critical point, not only because our native populations are suffering, but the planet is responding. And we know that when it comes to big companies or countries like U.S., Canada, or China, and don't get me wrong, China is not off the hook here because much of this tar sands oil is purchased by China. And so Canada and the United States are trying to accommodate those purchases by availing real estate, which means native lands, for the distribution. Sometimes whatever they've got to do in terms of refining this product, and tar sands oil takes, again, dirtiest oil on the planet. Whatever it takes to refine. I mean, it's kind of funny because Canada has to rely on the U.S. because Canada has higher standards when it comes to refining and some of the things that they can't even process their own oil because their environmental regulations won't allow them. So what do? They go to a place like the United States that has these, this industry that's grandfathered in that can still, belch out whatever contaminants they need to belch out to process this oil. And why? It's not for domestic supply. So anybody who gets onto this, well, this is about energy independence. No, it's not. This is about cashing out. And so what is being cashed out? Well, I'll tell you what's being cashed out. The boreal forests of Alberta. Massive swaths of land that are being, where the sand is either being mined, where they can separate this tar from the sand, or they've got a number of different processes. And some of these processes, they pipe in natural gas so they can superheat water to try to separate in the ground this tar from the sands in Alberta. And it's a mess. They have these huge settling ponds. Some of the largest dams in the world are these earthen dams up in Alberta. And what are they damming up? These huge lakes. You know what these huge lakes are? They're settling ponds. So what's the settling pond? It is this huge lake that is created with our own mother, with the earth, where there's a layer of oil on top of this water, and they try to skim the oil off the top. In the meantime, any wildlife that lands in these ponds is essentially dead. This is like creating a lake so you can have an oil, so you can have a functional oil spill. And that's what they do. They pump this oil and water into these lakes, and then it separates. And of course, it never really gets separated. I mean, don't think for a second when I talk about skimming the oil off the top of this water is forever contaminated. It's forever contaminated, as is the land. So this is what Canada has put up for sale. And they found a buyer. They found China. And then they found a co-conspirator in the United States to help them get this oil to market. And so who are the casualties of this? Of course, anybody who lived off this land, anybody who lived out of the off of the boreal forests, and of course anybody in the line of sight for these pipelines. And who are these people? Most of them are Native people. Look, Canada doesn't have a massive population up in this boreal forest region, but there's a small population of Native people. And this is where all of these fights are over. So whether we're talking about Wet'suwet'en territory, whether we're talking about pipelines going through, Akwesasne. So, and of course, it doesn't really matter if it's natural gas or if it's, Bakken crude or if it's tar sands oil. These are all fossil fuels. They are all contributing to the CO2 levels and to creating, climate change. They are all responsible for it. And even, as people will boast about, well, the natural gas burns much cleaner. Well, yeah, it does burn cleaner, but the carbon footprint associated with harvesting, with extracting natural gas, makes natural gas have as big a carbon footprint as oil does. Not as big as tar sands oil, but other oil. And of course, this involves hydrofracking, which is, for both natural gas and for Bakken crude, which is this terrible, unnatural process of putting ungodly amounts of pressure into the ground to crack the earth so they can have oil or natural gas, seep through. And of course, this has led to, contamination of water supplies. And now they'll argue, no, we're cracking the earth way down below the water table. Well, where do you think that stuff's leaking to as it comes to the surface? Look, we know that a certain level of natural gas comes through the ground naturally. That's how we knew it was there, right? And frankly, even crude oil. One of the earliest sites in what the United States calls their territory was Cold Springs, Seneca territory. It is one of the earliest known oil wells where oil naturally flowed out of the ground. And we use the oil, but the problem isn't using a natural gas or using naturally occurring crude oil. The problem is when you so voraciously go after it that you start measuring the value of land by how much you can suck out of the ground or underneath the ground. And that's what they've done. And this is the challenge that we've had. Look, I don't have, and I'm hoping that at some point I'll get Regan to join us on this program or on my show in Washington and New York. She has really, Regan has really immersed herself in this fight. But the fight is clear to any of us who have been fighting as indigenous people against this climate or this environmental degradation. We've all been fighting it, and we've been doing it for a very long time, and we will continue to do it. But like I said, at some point we have to realize that this fight isn't just going to be done by playing nice. So again, as we employ every strategy possible to fight Line 3 and the next pipeline after that and the next pipeline after that, these pipelines of natural gas that are even running through the cities and or to the cities through our territories. As we fight all of those things, we've got to employ whatever strategy we can. And look, these are fights. These are not, these aren't just civil actions. And in fact, we will accomplish very little in court. And I know that's one of the strategies is to tie up, these companies, these industries with as much legal action as possible. Well, that costs money too. I say we make it as difficult as possible for them. And when we go back to defining what nonviolent direct action is, look, I'm not calling for anybody to get hurt, but financially hurt, absolutely. And I think we need to do whatever we can to make these industries have a difficult time going through our territories. And frankly, I say this, all of it's our territories. But when they try to run these things by our lands, through our lands and where our populations live, there's a reason they choose it. Because our territories are considered sacrifice zones, not just by the oil industries, not just by the fossil fuel industries, by the states, by the United States, by Canada. If they can disrupt the environment that only impacts a small population of people, meaning Native people, then that's what they target. And so, I mean, and this isn't just an opinion. The facts bear this out. They'll keep their pipelines away from cities as much as they possibly can. They'll keep it away from the non-native populations. But look, if it's just rice fields, in Minnesota, rice fields, that's their attitude. Yeah, how many people are really living off that? And they'll do it. It'll be a numbers game for them. They're not going to assess the damage, the financial costs associated with the damage. Because let's face it, if a company does something that creates insurmountable damage, they can just file bankruptcy and walk away. There's no personal liability. Nobody goes to prison because of a BP oil spill or an Exxon Valdez spill. I mean, they might try to hang it on a ship captain, I guess. But nobody goes to jail for these environmental catastrophes. No. But people still die because of them. Not only when the accidents occur, but the cancer clusters that are created by these things. No, that's real. It's very real. So I wanted to do the show to talk about Line 3, but what more than anything else, I want you to learn about Line 3. So look it up. There's any number of sites you can look at it from the industry perspective, and I encourage you to do that because they're gonna put a nice shiny coat on it. But then look at it from the native perspective. Look at why we protest. Look at why we resist this, and look at what the cost is and what the danger is. So I'm asking you, just like we asked you to look at what the Dakota Access Pipeline was about, and we asked you to look at what the Keystone XL Pipeline was about, and we asked you to look at what all of the natural gas pipelines are about. I'm asking you to look at Line 3. Do some homework. I look forward to your comments, and we will be following this. And you know what? raise hell with the existing administration in Washington because much of this is still their call. They can do the right thing. The question is, will they do the right thing? And the right thing may not be the most economical thing because everything is measured in dollars and cents. And there's always a time limit to it. See, if people looked at things from a 7-generation standpoint, they would understand the entire cost. But if you only have to look at it in terms of a return on investment and how much money you can make in this calendar year or this fiscal year or the next fiscal year, you can measure in dollars and cents on the shortest term possible because most of the men who are making this decision, they're concerned about their pocketbooks, their lifetime, not their grandchildren, not their great-grandchildren, hell, not even their children, unless they've somehow pulled them into the industry as well. So we need to have a different view on this stuff. We have to look at this thing with the long view. And we also have to understand that we have a short time period, a short view to correct some of these things. So our strategies have to evolve. And like I said, to the younger generation, we need to empower you, not tell you what you can and can't do, but to encourage you to do perhaps what we weren't willing to do. I want to thank you for listening. I'm John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.